And good evening, good afternoon, good morning to wherever you're watching from here in the Philippines and from all over the world. And welcome to my podcast, the RJ Ledesma Podcast. In the RJ Ledesma Podcast, I like to interview the country's pioneering and trailblazing businessmen, entrepreneurs, and learn more about how they think about doing business. What are their success secrets? Can we emulate those success secrets in our own businesses? How have they innovated their businesses? How have they pivoted their businesses during the new normal? But more importantly, what do they see as the emerging opportunities amidst this pandemic and how we get out of this pandemic at the same time? Now, is there a business personality or entrepreneur that you would like me to interview here on the podcast? Please let me know. I would love to speak with them. I would love to learn from them. Just drop me a message. We're also live right now on Kumu, CBRC TV, Philippines TV, Bounce Back Network, and YouTube at the same time. Tonight, I'm very happy to speak to a guest who I admire very much. It was formerly one of my co-office mates in our former flat in A Space pre-pandemic, our good friend Manny Ayala. Manny Ayala is the co-founder and managing director of Endeavor Philippines. Endeavor is the leading global community for high impact entrepreneurs. They define high impact entrepreneurs as people with big ideas with the likeliest potential to build businesses that matter and can scale, and the greatest desire to pay it forward by helping other entrepreneurs. So please welcome here right now live, Mr. Manny Ayala.
Hey there, RJ. Glad to be here. I'm
Hi,
glad I
Manny.
made it right on time. I was fighting traffic just to be here on time.
Perfect. But thanks so much. It's been quite some time since we've had a chat. Our last chat has been a pre-pandemic, so I'm glad we're here right now. We used to be very close office mates in the past, and when Mercato used to be in the same office as Endeavor, I would invite Manny for our taste tests. Hopefully, one day, Manny, we can do that again.
Yep, and not only that, I go to your Mercato in the fort every now and then.
Thanks so much for the support. Thank you for supporting our small scale food entrepreneurs. Now,
Yeah.
the reason I got Manny here on the podcast right now is he's got a really great story about entrepreneurship here in the Philippines and how it's evolving. So, in our earlier shows, we get sort of like a micro perspective, or we get to see how entrepreneurs are evolving in their companies. But with Manny and the Endeavor team, we get to see the bird's eye view, what is happening and what is shaping entrepreneurship here in the Philippines. But before that, Manny, many people here might not be too familiar with what Endeavor is and what Endeavor does. I hope you don't mind if you can explain a bit more about Endeavor. I know I explained it. I shared a bit more like top lines of Endeavor, but maybe you can get into it for people who are aspiring entrepreneurs and people who want to also be inspired by Endeavor.
Of course. So Endeavor is a community, right? It's a global community composed of entrepreneurs, composed of mentors largely, right? So at the moment, we have over 1,300 entrepreneurs and over 5,000 mentors spread across about 40 markets. And we've been at this now for about 25 years.
Wow.
And, important thing to note is that we are a nonprofit, right? And our main focus as a nonprofit is really helping to scale up entrepreneurs by providing them with access to mentors and access to markets. Now, having said that, we also do have a fund. It's called the Endeavor Catalyst Fund, which invests only in Endeavor entrepreneurs. But let me go to a more kind of basic idea, right? The basic
Mhm.
idea, our core belief is that high impact entrepreneurs, which you described earlier, right? So these are unusually good entrepreneurs who scale up their business, make it successful, and then pay it forward. Our core belief is that high impact entrepreneurs can transform entire economies. So, how do we do that? What do we do? Well, we like to say we help to create a multiplier effect,
Mhm.
right? How does that work? Well, it starts with inspiring these entrepreneurs to dream bigger. That's number one. And then number two, we support them so that they can scale up really, really large and really, really fast. And then number three, to then encourage them to pay it forward, right? So if you like, we have a social contract with them, right? Where we'll say, listen, we'll help you, right? By giving you access to mentors, giving you access to markets, giving you access to capital. Um, but here's the deal. Once you become successful, you pay it forward by doing the same thing to the next generation of entrepreneurs. our hope is that you multiply yourself by 10. And then in that next generation, the hope is those 10 multiply themselves by 10, and so on and so forth, right? Which leads to the why are we doing this, right? The why is because we're trying to build thriving entrepreneurial ecosystems, right? And I'm happy to report that, now this is sort of our 8 years of doing this. We really have seen a big change between year one and year eight.
Wow. Really great. And before that, for people who are interested to learn more about Endeavor and Endeavor Philippines right now, can we just share right now the link here on screen, Julio? So the link for Endeavor, if you want to learn more about them, is endeavor.org.ph. For those who want to learn more about
Mhm.
the organization, that's endeavor.org.ph. And if you want to learn more about Endeavor as a whole, they also have their global website, which is endeavor.org. Now, earlier
Mhm.
on, what Manny was trying to describe is just what their purpose is, what they're doing here in the Philippines, creating a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem, making sure that there is a strong multiplier effect for more for more entrepreneurs to thrive. No, and I'm guessing before we get into it, Manny, correct me if I'm wrong. They were saying that in the Philippines, 99.5% of the businesses over here are micro, small, and medium enterprises, small family businesses, which are
Yeah,
being put
that's
up.
right. It's the vast majority, by far the vast majority. Yep.
And that being the vast majority. Uh, and we're both very active also in Go Negosyo and these other social
Mhm.
enterprises within our ecosystem. And they're thinking that the best way for a country to rise above poverty is to really support
Yeah,
entrepreneurship
that's
as,
right.
as something, because people used to look down on entrepreneurs. I mean, earlier on, the thinking for entrepreneurs is that you couldn't get a job, therefore you couldn't get a job in the
Yeah,
formal sector. You could be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer. You're an entrepreneur. But really,
yeah.
help
What
us.
I'm glad,
You can get
I'm
more
glad the
about why is
mindset is.
entrepreneurship so important?
Sorry, say that again.
Why is what give us a better way to think about entrepreneurship? Why is it so important, especially for developing economies?
Um, Gosh, why is it important? Well, I don't. I mean, I'm going to just speak personally about it, right? I feel that I achieve my fullest potential as an entrepreneur, right? That I spend my time and I spend my energy focused on things that really align with my own personal mission statement, right? And I love this idea of creating something out of nothing, right? And these are engines of job creation. These are engines of wealth creation. So I look at, for instance, the 33 entrepreneurs that we support in 2022 will end 2022, and they would have generated about 30 billion pesos of revenue, right?
The
So
the
imagine that.
33 the 33 Filipino
Yeah,
startup
collectively,
entrepreneurs who joined you. Is that right?
collectively, yeah,
Collectively.
collectively.
Wow.
So you think about, well, what if they hadn't started those businesses, right? Mawawala yung 30 billion pesos in wealth creation. And another statistic which we're very happy about is they represent 30,000 jobs, or almost 30,000 jobs. So again, you think about this, right? If they hadn't started, where would these people have found jobs, right? And these are great jobs and exciting companies.
Wow. And with that, no, let's get a bit more into the great news about Endeavor here right now. I understand Endeavor right now has generated an impact report, and if you can just
Yeah,
show that on screen here right now, Julio, it's the endeavor.org.ph/2022-impact-report, and it's a very insightful and revealing report about as to how entrepreneurship has evolved here in the Philippines. And we
yeah.
call it right now. We can see right now here the Philippine multiplier effect. Can you share with us a bit more about the highlights of this report and how it
Yeah,
impacts us as entrepreneurs in
I,
the Philippines?
Yeah, actually, before I go into the highlights of the report itself, I
Mm-hmm,
think I think it would be good to talk about where this idea of the multiplier effect comes from. Where have we seen this,
mm-hmm,
right? Because it's kind of related to our mission statement, diba, is we can transform entire economies on the back of these entrepreneurs that are very, we say in Endeavor, right? They have to be 3M: magaling, matino, mapagbigay, right? So on the back of these entrepreneurs who are magaling, matino, mapagbigay, right, and they reinvest their success in other entrepreneurs, you create this multiplier effect. But the first place really that you think of, or that we think of when we think multiplier effect, is Silicon Valley, diba?
Mm-hmm.
Silicon Valley, home to hundreds, if not thousands, of the most iconic, the most valuable tech companies out there, right? And you ask yourself, well, how did Silicon Valley become Silicon Valley? Well, they benefited, obviously from the presence of the U.S. Defense Department, which was investing in a lot of technology R&D in the 30s and the 40s. You had the presence of Stanford University, which had an engineering program, and as early as the 40s, these engineers were being encouraged to go off and start their own thing. But really, much of the credit for Silicon Valley goes to a physicist, right, named William Shockley. So this physicist won a Nobel Prize in 1956. He was working for Bell Labs. He invented a transistor used in semiconductors, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this was a critical invention for the whole semiconductor industry. But he decides to do something, right? He says, I'm going to start my own company. I'm going to take my invention. I'm going to start my own company. I'm going to become an entrepreneur. So he starts Shockley Semiconductor. Now, he decides that he's going to set this up not in the East Coast where he was, but all the way across the country to be near his ailing mother. I guess he was a good son, right? So he sets up in a small town, population 6,500 in California, called, ready for this? Mountain View, right? Today we know Mountain View is the headquarters of Google, right?
Mm-hmm.
And other companies like Intuit, right? There's just dozens and dozens of companies in Mountain View. But back then, it was nothing, right? It really was nothing. And so, you would be forgiven if you said, man, what a dumb idea, right? You're going to try to create a high-tech company. You're going to go all the way there. How are you going to find money? How are you going to find talent? Diba?
Literally, money in the boondocks, di ba? As they say in the States, it's all the way in
Literally.
the boondocks.
Exactly, right? So, fortunately for him, because of his Nobel Prize, he was able to raise money. Fortunately for him, because of his Nobel Prize, he was able to find 8 young engineers. Right now, unfortunately for these 8 young engineers, Mr. Shockley was a nightmare to work for.
Oh man.
Right? This was the kind of boss who would make his employees take lie detector tests. In fact, if you do some research on William Shockley, some people consider him a paranoid schizophrenic. So he drove them insane, right? And he drove them so insane that one day, after about a year being with him, they all decided to quit. They all quit and they decided to start their own company, another semiconductor company, which they called Fairchild Semiconductor. Okay, now they were so magaling, right? These 8 young engineers, they were so magaling that in less than 10 years, they became the second largest semiconductor company in the world, right? Now, they were so successful, but they didn't stop having achieved that success. And what happens next is what many writers consider to be the most important event in business history in the last 100 years. Can you guess what they did? What do you think they did?
Um, I'm not so
See, we're
sure.
talking about
I'm worried.
multiplier effect, diba? What do you think they
Yeah.
did?
They shared their skill set with other people, or they shared their business model with other people.
Parang
Well, that's my
ganon,
guess.
right? So, yeah, well, they started new companies. They began mentoring each other's companies, and friends of friends companies. They began investing in each other's companies,
Mm.
right? And they set in motion, I think what we can say was maybe the first observable multiplier effect, right? And
Okay.
to give you a sense of the scale of this thing, right? After or within 12 years after they left Fairchild, they basically spawned 31 spin-off companies. And these are not little, nothing pipichugin companies, right? These companies include Intel, right? So one of the Fairchild engineers was a guy named Eugene Moore. And there's a theory in physics called Moore's law, right, which says that um, computer power doubles every 18 months, right? So he
Mhm.
he coined that phrase, or that phrase was coined after him, right? And he set that up with another one of the engineers, Robert Noyce. Now, if you look, there are other companies like AMD, Applied Materials, National Semiconductors, right? Super big companies. These were some of the companies that came out of the Fairchild group, right? On the VC front, two of the most well-known names, Kleiner Perkins, Sequoia, right? These all came from people who were at Fairchild. Now, this phenomenon, right, the multiplier effect, sometimes people refer to these eight as the Fairchild Mafia. Right? This is mafia in a good sense, right? So these are like benevolent mafia guys, right? Kung baga, these were the ones who people went to for help, right? So fast forward to today, right? If you look at the biggest companies in Silicon Valley, if you look at all the listed companies, about 70% of them can trace their roots back to these eight, right? So
Wow.
these include companies like Apple, right? So for instance, with Apple, the one of the heads of marketing at Fairchild was a guy named Mike Markula. Mike Markula met a partnership that was building a computer, right? He wrote the first check to them, $250,000, right? This partnership was called Apple. So so these hundreds of companies that trace their roots back to them, they're called fair children, right? So they include companies like Google and Yahoo and Facebook and LinkedIn and WhatsApp, right? Ang dami. And what's really interesting, what's fascinating is that this multiplier culture has come to define Silicon Valley, right? So much so that, more recent vintage. Have you heard of the PayPal mafia?
Yes, yes, that's what I'm for. That's of our generation, more of our generation,
Yeah,
right, Manny?
that was so 2002, right? eBay acquires PayPal. So all of a sudden, ang daming milyonaryo, right? All of these guys that were early executives and founders in PayPal were phenomenally wealthy. And again, like with the Fairchild Mafia, they didn't stop with that success. They did the same thing. They started building new companies. They started mentoring other people's companies. They started investing in other people's companies. Who are some of these people in the PayPal Mafia? Well, just to name two, one of them was Elon Musk, right? Who started SpaceX, started Tesla, and then now owns Twitter.
Hmm.
Another one who sits on the board of Endeavor in the US was Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn, right? These folks in PayPal also went on to invest in big companies like Airbnb, sorry, when they were still earlier, Airbnb, Facebook, and Square. Okay, so you look at that, you look at Silicon Valley and say, oh my God, right? Yeah, so that's what really made the what do you call it, the flywheel, move and accelerate more quickly, right? It's the presence of these mafias, right? These pay it forward multipliers.
I see.
So the question I think Endeavor asked almost, about 2 decades ago. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, right?
Congratulations,
Philippines,
Endeavor.
thank you. Philippines celebrating 8, but as a global organization celebrating 25. So back then, what we asked is, can you do this in emerging markets? Right? Sure, you can do this in Silicon Valley, maraming pera, they have universities, right? They have all this talent. Can you do this kaya in emerging markets? So what we did, right, is we put our researchers to work. And we did research in one of our first markets, which was Argentina.
Hmm.
And we conducted a survey, right? And in that survey, we asked 200 entrepreneurs 5 questions. Who inspired you to become an entrepreneur? Who mentored you in your journey? Who invested in you? Where did you train before you started your own company? And what other companies did you start? And we began mapping all the connections, right? And what you come up with after you map them is like a big molecule, right? With little bubbles and big bubbles. So if you go to that multiplier map that's in the link, you should at some point see the Philippine ecosystem. But back in Argentina, when we did this, right, what we noticed was in the early days, not too many companies, not too many interactions, right? So, in the year 1999, for instance, first dot com boom. Remember that? First dot com
Hmm.
boom. There were only 17 tech companies in Argentina. 17. And there wasn't much interaction between them. But when you fast forwarded 15 years to 2014, there were now over 200 companies. And most importantly, you would see all these connections between them, right? So these were parang the mafias at work trying to nurture some of the other companies in the ecosystem. The fascinating thing about this research is, the more connections you have to other companies, in other words, the more mentoring and inspiring and investing and training you do, the larger your bubble. And what we see with Argentina is there's about, six or seven, you know, much larger than normal bubbles. Those are the high impact entrepreneurs, right? Those are the ones that people go to for help. And they're the ones who are generous enough to say, yes, I will help. Diba? Um, what's also interesting is if you look at those big bubbles, most of them, usually three-fourths of them tend to be endeavor companies, right? And it should be no surprise because that's how we screen, right? So we screen for people who are not only magaling, but also matino and mapagbigay, right? Now, in that impact report we did, you'll see the Philippine Multiplier Map, and you'll see the same thing that happened in Argentina, right? That there are beginning to emerge these larger than average bubbles, right? So if you look at our map, you'll see Nix Noliado there, you'll see Ron Hose of Coins, you'll see
Mhm.
Richard Elbridge of Lendo, Paul Rivera of Caliber, you'll see Roland Ross and Rexy Dorado of Kumu, and Steve C of Great Deals, right?
Wow, wow. What a lineup. I mean, if I mean that is the Philippine startup scene right there.
Um, what makes me happiest, frankly, what makes Endeavor happiest, it's not so much the market cap,
Hmm.
or the size of the revenue. We say, success should be defined not just as that, but also by the impact that you have in the wider ecosystem. And when you look at those folks I just mentioned, the reason their bubbles are bigger is because they had more inspiring and mentoring and investing, right, going on. That's what makes us excited, right? That's what makes, I think, the flywheel go faster, right, in the ecosystem. When you have inspirational, magaling, pay it forward characters like those.
Wow. So I mean, having said all that, it's truly incredible, and it's nice to know that when we're looking at things the same way that you said, we are looking at business history
Yeah,
from the Silicon Valley perspective. We're also looking at business history from a Philippine perspective
absolutely,
of how
absolutely.
startups are actually evolving things. So if you look at the big bubbles over here,
Yeah,
can you tell us a bit more of how it's evolved over here in the past couple of years? I know that this is part of the entrepreneurial report that you guys have come up with in the impact report.
yeah.
Tell us a bit more about how is entrepreneurship evolving in the Philippines, and how has Endeavor actually come in and intervene to help them become more impactful.
Yeah, I guess you can say that, for any entrepreneur to succeed, or in any entrepreneurial ecosystem, therefore, to succeed, you need three things, right? Entrepreneurs need access to capital, they need access to talent, and they need access to a market, right? So they need to be able to sell, right, and generate revenue. 10 years ago, when you talk about capital, I like to say that the entire VC industry that was based here could fit into my Starex, right?
That's right. That's right. Pretty much. I mean, 10
Right.
years ago, money, it was you're hard pressed to even explain. If you're gonna ask for a VC, you couldn't find any here in the Philippines, or they'd be far few and far between.
That's right. You say, are there any VCs here? When you say, what? Viet Cong? What VC? But at that time, I think it was really only Kickstart, right?
That's right.
There, and I
And a
had,
local VC, a local venture capitalist, for that
yeah,
matter.
and then you had the foundation of Idea Space, right, which was under PLDT, and I had a little venture builder, right, called Hatched,
That's right.
um, which gave birth to companies like Rappler and Pawn Hero and Purple Click. But really, it was not very many. If you fast forward to today, right, there's so many more players, both locally and from overseas, who have set up here. what's interesting is I think 2021 from a investment point of view was an inflection year for the Philippines. And I say that because we saw some interesting things happen, right? We had a bunch of Series B financings all in one year. You had the first Series C financing, and then you began to see some of these super high end, large global VCs come in and make an investment, right? So you had General Atlantic, which made an
Mhm.
investment in Kumu. KKR went into grocery, right? You had Tiger Global, which went into Pidax,
Mhm.
right? And that was a watershed year. Because before that, they had never really invested here. Diba? So what you can say is for sure, what a difference a decade makes. In terms of the absolute numbers, no, I mean 2021, the amount of capital that came in was about $1 billion, which equals the 4 years preceding that combined, right? That's combined. Now, what about talent? When you look at the talent, I'll just give you one data point, right? In the last almost, what is it? Maybe the last 2 years, 8 or 9 companies from here have gotten into that prestigious tech accelerator called Y Combinator.
That's right.
Now,
And they're
before
growing.
that,
I like the idea that they're actually growing in number in terms of
yeah,
number of Filipino startups qualifying for Y
that's
Combinator.
right. Before that, right, the first one was 2013. That was Caliber,
Hmm.
and then many years went by, wala, right, and then 2018 was Paymongo, and then and then from there you began to see more people applying, and here we have, as I said, about 9 in the last 2 years.
You had like NextPay, Mad Eats,
Yeah,
and several others. Yes.
you're also beginning to see more sort of corporate refugees, right? So people that were kind of high flying in the corporate world deciding to take the plunge, right, which is a little bit rarer in the early days. An example of that would be, let's see ER Rolian, the co-founder of
Grocery.
Grocery,
Hmm.
who was working, as a management consultant at BCG, and then worked at, I think it was Unilever, right, in FMCG. So you're beginning to see more and more people like that as well. And then the last thing is market, right? Last thing is market. When you look at gross merchandise value, right, that's the amount, the dollar value of everything sold online. In 2020, we were about 7 billion, and then that almost doubled, right? That almost doubled to 18 billion by 2021. 10 years ago, that it would have been a fraction of that, right? So we, on all three fronts, right, we've come, as they used to say in that Virginia Slim cigarette ad, you've come a long way, baby.
Exactly, exactly. Um, Manny, I'm wondering, when you look at the history of, how the startups grew bigger, bigger, where the bubble became bigger for us, was there
Yeah.
an inflection point over here in the Philippines where all of a
Well,
sudden,
the mga 2021 to me was an inflection point, right? With the amount of capital that came in, with the kinds of investors that came in, right? That to me sent a very clear signal to the rest of the world: the Philippines is hot, right?
the Philippines being hot, I have a question. Is it because globally, or at least the Philippine startups are becoming bigger, or was there a demographic change here or something where they were saying the Philippines, it's a good time to come in right now because they were trying
Yeah.
before they never saw Philippines as a but now it's becoming a legitimate market because of the
Alam mo,
population.
I used to talk about the perfect storm of the Philippines. My God, 10 years ago pa, right? I said it's the perfect storm. Why? Because we have a very young population, right? Average age 24 point something. And they're all digitally savvy, right? I used to say we are a nation of ADD, right? Addicted to digital devices, because
Mhm.
our usage metrics were off the chart, diba? Up to now. Who are the top 10 or the top 5 countries for usage for Facebook, for Twitter, for Instagram, right? It's us, right? And then on top of that, you add the fact that the Philippines, for the better part of 20 years, has had a very good macroeconomic run, right? We've been growing generally from 5 to 7% per year,
Mhm.
with some exceptions like the global financial crisis, right? But by and large, we've been growing much more briskly than the rest of the world. Diba? So that perfect storm, I used to argue 10 years ago, right? Means it's the perfect time to invest in the Philippines. Well, that proved to be a little bit early, but you're now seeing that all of these factors have contributed to real money, big money being spent online, right? Whether it's
Wow.
advertising, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's subscriptions for this or that.
Manny, when you look at the different businesses that actually qualified to become endeavor businesses, are you seeing sort of like, I mean, they can be from disparate industries, but are there common denominators aside from being high impact? Is there something about them that you really like, that you've seen, that that
Yeah,
makes us a bit different from others
I
in
guess the
other
first thing
countries?
I guess the first thing I'll say is that we consider ourselves to be industry agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the companies in our portfolio, we have both tech and non-tech. And within tech, it's everything under the sun pretty much. I would say if you look at the framework for how we evaluate our entrepreneurs, we look at three things. We look at the entrepreneur, we look at the business, and we look at the timing. So with respect to the entrepreneur, obviously they have to have the classic, skills of an entrepreneur, right? They have to be scrappy. They have to have grit. They need to be able to raise money. They need to be able to, build a team, you know, all that stuff. But beyond that, we say, is this entrepreneur somebody willing to grow and learn, right? Are they going to be receptive to mentoring? Kasi our sweet spot is mentoring, right? So if they're not
Mm-hmm.
willing to be mentored, parang sayang lang, right? To be an endeavor. So we ask, is this entrepreneur somebody that's willing to learn and grow? And then we ask, is there any evidence that this entrepreneur is going to pay it forward, right? Because again, if you're magaling but you're not mapagbigay, it's a little bit hard to be in this network because we have expectations of you as an entrepreneur. So that's on the entrepreneur side. On the business side, we ask the usual questions. Is it a large market that you're chasing? Diba? Kasi sayang lang if we're going to expend all these resources and let's say you have really perfect product market fit, but it's such a teeny tiny market. Are you really high impact, right? How many lives are you actually impacting? So is it a large market? And hopefully it's a large and growing market. We also ask, is what you're doing innovative? Is it transformative? Is it disruptive? Right? Because part of the deal here is we want our entrepreneurs to be inspiring, diba, to the rest of the world. And how can you inspire the rest of the world if what you're doing is an also ran been done many times before kind of model? So we ask, is it innovative and transformative and disruptive? In terms of the timing, what we ask is this company at an inflection point? In other words, it's ready for takeoff if only it had more support, right? If only it had the support of 5,000 mentors and 1,300 other entrepreneurs and the staff,
Wow.
right? Like the staff in the Philippines. Now, in terms of, I would say concentration, I would say the vertical with the most entrepreneurs in Endeavor Philippines would be Fintech,
Fintech.
right? And I don't think anyone should be surprised, right? Because you look at that statistic of what, 70% unbanked, and you say to yourself, okay, well, somebody's gonna come in and figure out a way to bank the unbanked. And you know what? That's what they've done. They're trying to figure out ways to get to that 70% that isn't part of the formal banking sector.
If you don't mind, this is a great place for people to learn. What is just samples of the best, the most high impact fintechs that you've seen? Why do you think they're really great for the country?
Well, our first fintech was coins.ph, right? And
Ron
I
Host,
think
please.
coins, yeah, that's Ron Hos, and he, part of his technology was blockchain. Um, that was very important because it got people to really think of this as a daily part of their lives, right? An e-wallet, right? And I think they were more nimble, right, than the incumbents. Although over time the incumbents got so big, and that momentum has done really well. But back then when he was starting, I think he really helped to popularize the idea of sort of digital payments, right? Digital money transfer. And he got rewarded because he got acquired by Gojek back in 2019, right? For a
That's right.
large sum of money, right? For a large sum of money. Now, the thing that makes me happiest actually is not so much that Ron was able to exit, but the fact that Ron spent so much time mentoring these young entrepreneurs. In fact, you can find Ron, there's a good chance you'll find Ron up in that entrepreneur community in La Union, right? So he hangs out there, and there's been a whole community of entrepreneurs that grew up during the pandemic, right?
Exactly, exactly. So aside from coins, which are the other fintechs that you've also brought on board to Endeavor? And which one you really?
Yeah, so there's a company called Lendo, started by Richard Eldridge. That's a credit scoring company. There's a company called First Circle, which is online lending, started by Patrick Lynch, who's an ex Morgan Stanley banker.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a company called Ayana of Miko Perez, which is
Nico
a
Perez.
online payments platform. It's I guess a neutral, interoperable payments platform, right? So he can connect with a whole host of cash in, cash out points. Whether it's a Palawan pawn shop or a human being with a mobile phone, right?
Not
And
that.
then recently we had Tonic, right, which is a neobank started by Greg Krasnov, and we've also helped an Endeavor entrepreneur from South Africa, right, running a company called Time Bank. That's another neobank, Time Bank. So here they've partnered with the Gokong Ways. It's called Go Time.
No time.
Go Time. Yeah.
That's right. Very,
So it's a
very
lot,
interesting.
right? A lot happening.
A lot happening in our space over here. And having said that, I hope you don't mind. I want to pick your brains a bit more over here, Manny, as people look.
Mm,
Because I mean, to be part of the Endeavor system is just it's laudable, but at the same time, they go through a sort of like a strict process.
yeah.
What would you say to It's our turn to give us some advice for entrepreneurs listening here right now,
Yeah.
and they would like to be part of the Endeavor Philippines program.
Yeah.
How do they qualify? If they set to apply to you, what's the process for them? What should they look for? How do they make themselves Endeavor ready, for
Yeah,
lack
let
of a
me
better?
let me let me describe the process. Now, that might be the best way of answering your question.
Mhm.
Let me just describe the process how somebody becomes an Endeavor entrepreneur. So we have a process, right, which typically takes 12 to 18 months, right, which starts with what we call a first opinion review. That's a 1 hour meeting with me and my staff where we try to understand, will you fit into that criteria that I described now about the entrepreneur, the business, and the timing, right? And if we say, yep, I think, there's potential here, we'll have them do another 4 to 5 1 hour meetings over several months, right? With some of our mentors, either mentors from the Philippines or mentors from overseas or both, right? Again, it's a 1 hour format. The way the meeting is run is the entrepreneur will describe the business, and then there'll be 45 minutes of Q&A, and then typically 5 minutes of the mentor dispensing some advice. Obviously, before the meeting, we collect data from the entrepreneur. Um, so we'll do 4 or 5 of those meetings. We call those second opinion reviews. If they've gone through that and we still think, yeah, bagay pa to sa Endeavor, right? We will have them go to a local selection panel, right? That's a little bit like a Shark Tank event.
Mhm.
So typically at a LSP, local selection panel, we'll invite 2 to 3 companies who will be reviewed, but typically by 6 people grouped into 3 groups of 2. And again, same format, right? 1 hour interview. Now, the difference with the LSP is at the end of these interviews, the 6 panelists will get together around the table and they'll have a debate. And the only thing they're trying to answer in that debate is this company ready to go to the final stop, right? Which is the International Selection Panel, or ISP. That's a global Shark Tank. But rather than 3 companies, there might be 26 companies from all over the world with panelists from all over the world putting them to the exact same process of an
Mhm.
interview, and then at the end they have the deliberations just among the panelists. Um, some, I guess, some quantitative benchmarks, right? Typically, when you get to a local selection panel, we want you to be doing 3 to 5 million US dollars in annual revenue already, right? So we like to say we're about scale ups, not so much about startups,
Mhm.
which is why we like working with the likes of Kubo, right? 917 Ventures, right? We see hopefully some of the early stars through some of these places that help them at a very early stage. So, as I said, at an LSP, $3 to 5 million in annual revenue, growing fast, right? 80 to 100% a year. By the time they get to an ISP, we're hoping that they're doing 5 to 10 million, and again, growing at 80 to 100%, right? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and then eventually, what have you seen in terms of the profile of the sort of companies that are joining? I mean, I know you're industry agnostic, but then I mean, aside from fintech being a sort of financial inclusion as being something that's very key, what are the other companies also that they want to be part of Endeavor, but at the same time, they're good for the development of the country. What have you seen as good to go through the Endeavor program?
So Great Deals is an e-commerce enabler, right? That's not fintech. Kumu is not fintech, right? That's a live stream platform. Um, you have Equilife Medical, right, which is critical care equipment. They both sell as well as lease and service these machines. We had an entrepreneur from early on called PSG Global Solutions, right? That is a recruitment process outsourcing company.
Mhm.
And you know what? These guys just exited. They were acquired by Teleperformance for a large sum of money, right? Which was amazing. On the non-tech front, we have people like Zark's Burgers, right?
Zarks.
What an amazing story that we had with Zark. Do you know the Zark story?
He was an OFW. He was an OFW when he came back, right?
Yeah, listen, I think he took up HRM in college. I
That's
can't
right.
remember if he studied in Bacolod or Iloilo, right? So his dream was always to be in the food business, and I guess to deepen his learning, he worked in the kitchen of an Outback restaurant,
Hmm.
right? Did that for a bit, and then from there, right, to continue his learning, went and worked in the kitchen of a cruise liner, one of these big cruise liners, right?
Hmm.
And once he had felt he had learned enough, saved enough, he started a kiosk, right? That kiosk became a restaurant. So his first restaurant was on Taft Avenue across LaSalle, right?
Hmm.
That one restaurant, guess how many outlets today?
100. I'm
No, it's
guessing.
about almost 80, right? Almost 80,
80.
right? And you think, oh my gosh, right? What if he hadn't started that business? What if he decided to do something else? Think about how much value he's created, right? We also have Laybear, which is the largest waxing salon chain in the Philippines. That was Paulo Hilario and his sister started that. Right, again from one stores to, my gosh, I think almost 100 stores yata across the country.
With all these different stories, I know that you're telling us that the intervention that Endeavor brings is also the sort of mentorship that comes into the picture. Can you give me an example of, let's say, for example, so of somebody qualified, a startup or a business qualified for Endeavor, and how did their plans change? Did they pivot, or were they just able to scale much better as a result of Endeavor coming in? Can you share with us a
Yeah.
case study of that?
What One of my favorite pivot stories was the story of Kumu, right? Kumu, which is so famous now, it's disrupted the media industry. When they set out to create their business, they weren't thinking live stream. They wanted to be a social media platform like Kakao, right? Or like
Like
WhatsApp. They
now.
wanted to create the WhatsApp for the Philippines, right? So
Mhm.
they start to build that thing, and actually one of their interns discovered, right, looking at all the data of what was actually being used on the platform, she noticed, wow, the heaviest usage was coming with this little live stream function in the background, right? And when they saw that, they said, "Oh my gosh, I think that's the future," right? So they pivoted to that, and that's why today, that's the core of what they do, right? It's a live stream platform.
Amazing, amazing. And how did, I guess after the interns saw that one, they were able to pivot that one. How about Endeavor? What does Endeavor also help? I mean, when the intervention of Endeavor came in to say, okay, where can you give us an example where a mentor came in and said, okay, it's doing good, but this one, when you do this one, the business is going to accelerate, and it actually did.
Our role really is to we typically, we the staff typically don't play the role of mentor, right?
Okay.
Although, we often do give them, some advice, but it's largely finding the perfect subject matter expert, right?
Mm-hmm.
Finding the perfect mentor to address an issue that they have. So it could be, this person really needs to raise capital, right? So we're going to look for somebody that knows their vertical, their segment, right? In their stage of fundraising. Say, hey, give this guy naman some advice, right, on, you know, who he should be raising from. Or we'll make introductions to people that we think should be looking at him, and writing a check for a company like his. Or it could be, this company has to make changes to the org structure. They might have to reduce their headcount. Well, we'll go look for an entrepreneur that has done that before, right? Because these are
Mm,
tricky things, right? You
yes,
don't just
exactly.
go and say,
Wow.
okay, 100 of you, you're out, right? You have to do this in a very humane way that doesn't destroy the culture, right? How
Not
do
in
you
a
do that?
Twitter, not in Twitter fashion, but in a more humane way.
Not in Twitter fashion, right? Exactly. I still, sorry, this is just an aside. I remember because part of my career before was in the media, right? And I was working in Turner Broadcasting. I heard this story of how Ted Turner fired his son because his son was working for the company.
Hmm.
So he was at the breakfast table reading the paper like this, right? And then the son comes in, right? So he looks, puts the paper down, looks at the son, and says, "Son, you're toast," and goes back to his newspaper. So hopefully hindi ganyan, right? Hopefully hindi
Yeah.
ganyan, right?
Yeah.
So
So
this is really the thing, RJ, right? Businesses have a whole host of issues, right? Whether it has to do with market entry, in which case we'll try to find you the right connections, right? Take for instance, right? You want to go into Indonesia. Imagine if you had no connections in Indonesia, how many cold emails you'd have to send, how many cold calls you'd have to make, how
mhm.
much knocking on doors you'd have to do. Versus, because where there's an endeavor in Indonesia, we'll go and work with the Indonesia office, and we will find the perfect people for you to talk to with a very warm introduction, right? So that has the endorsement, right, of Endeavor Indonesia. I mean, that's priceless, right? I mean, how would you
Exactly.
even put a value on something like that? If your issue is money, it's two things, right? We have a lot of people who have raised money and can give you advice on how that works, but we can also introduce you to the VCs themselves, right? Who we think would be interested in your particular business, right? Again, as I told you, organizational stuff, right? There's a whole bunch of people expert in HR, and we can even match you with people from your same vertical,
Wow.
right? So if you're an e-commerce guy, well, let's go and find an e-commerce person in Latin America, right? Who has lived your present 10 years ago, diba?
Getting the big boys to help the younger boys
Yeah, exactly.
to
People who
get
have
bigger.
been there, done that, right? I mean, that's priceless.
Exactly. Now, looking at the Philippines right now, and you've got this opportunity where you have a bird's eye view of entrepreneurship and where trends are going, how the economy is going. Um, what do you see as emerging opportunities for entrepreneurs, both in the startup and the non-startup world? What you've been seeing so far, you've seen fintech is financial inclusion is one thing.
Yeah.
Social media is one thing because you've seen the growth live streaming through Kumu, and you've also seen the growth of e-commerce. What do you see as other opportunities where entrepreneurs can still leverage their skills and grow bigger?
Yeah. Let me say a few things. First, have you heard of the Iron Triangle of Jack Ma?
Um, Yes, yes, I have actually took the Alibaba Netpreneur class. But then please re-enlighten us again.
Yeah, because I guess the way Jack Ma looked at it, right, there were three critical components to the internet economy. You have e-commerce, you have fintech, and then you have logistic,
Yeah.
right? So if you look at the Philippines, meron ng e-commerce, right, with Lazada, Shopee, Zalora. You know, as I said, there's a whole host of fintechs arising, but there's not that many in logistic, right? We actually have one in Endeavor now. This is a company called Intelluck, which just joined the network this year, right? Run by a very inspiring young Chinese entrepreneur named Kevin Zhang, right? Who came here because they have a family business, and he was assigned to come here. Didn't Was kind of bored with that business, and he said it was all about making more and more and more money. Whereas what he wanted to do was, how can I, make an impact in a society? And what he saw was his big gaping hole in logistic.
Hmm.
That's what he chose
Wow.
to do now. And now he's spreading his wings in Thailand. So it's not just the Philippines, pero may Thailand na rin.
Wow.
So that's one, right?
Sometimes,
Is
yeah,
logistic.
logistic.
You
And
know,
what else?
and then the other things, right, that still need to be solved. Um, Actually, even within fintech, right? Lending. Who's doing lending successfully, right? I think there's a lot of room for lending. There's a lot of room for insurance, right? We're a very underinsured nation. I think one of the most underinsured in all of Southeast Asia. Then, of course, you have the whole health sector, right? So many people don't have access to good, affordable healthcare. So you're now seeing the rise of health tech companies. So one of our entrepreneurs, si Abet Valenzuela of Equilife, has started, and we're so happy she did because it's so endeavor. She started a venture builder called Pulse 63, which is incubating a bunch of these health tech companies.
Nice, very nice, very nice.
Okay, other sectors, basically, you just think, ano yung mga problema sa Pilipinas, right? And that will be a good place to look. So education, right? As you know, education is a challenge for us. So there's a bunch of ed tech companies that are coming up, like Education of Henry
It's
Mott
Henry Mott.
Munoz. Yeah.
Wow. And
And
the
then
thing,
just
yeah.
today, right? Just today, I was at a conference. It was called
Hmm.
the Agri Food Tech Summit,
Hmm.
right? And this is, I think, a very interesting place to look because we're a big producer and consumer of food, and the question you can ask is, has technology touched this sector? And I would say very minimally, right? There's so many opportunities to
Hmm.
digitalize this whole sector, right? How do you make it more productive? How do you make financing and payments more accessible to farmers, right? Andame. And dami. So that I think is quite exciting.
When you talk, when I hear you talk, and I see also all the different entrepreneurs who've come into Endeavor. I Correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression often is that sometimes it takes people who don't come from the Philippines, foreigners who look at the Philippines and can see the problems that many Filipinos often take for granted, and these guys actually build these startup companies which solve these problems. As you can see from something like Coins or Lendmo, these are not actually Filipinos, but these are actually foreigners who saw the problems here, which Filipinos have taken for
Yeah.
granted. What do you think about that?
I think there's kind of a pattern, right? When you look at emerging markets and you look at the growth of entrepreneur ecosystems, there seems to be a pattern, right? And I kind of distilled it this way, right? Very often in the first wave, you'll see expats, right?
Hmm.
So these are people, kasi, who have had a lot of experience elsewhere. They've built businesses elsewhere. They've seen problems and how they get solved elsewhere, right? So they go hunting for places where there are problems that haven't been solved yet, right? And they have the confidence to start something. They have the network to raise money, and the network to hire a few critical people to start the business with, right? Then after the expat wave, you'll very often see a repat wave, right? So these are people who either were educated, overseas and then came back, or even Philams, like Roland and Rexy,
Like cool.
who visited, but then they decided to set up their business here, right? And then what you see is what I call the dapat, right? You see, go from expat to repat to dapat, right? So
Dapat.
the
I like
homegrown
that.
guy who may not have necessarily had all of this foreign exposure, right? But what they do know really well are the local problems, right? And it's great because they get inspired, when they see other people building businesses here, right? They get inspired to follow suit, and they think, oh, pwede pala eh. You can actually create something and make money. And my parents won't say I'm a loser, right? Because I didn't go and work for Citibank or McKinsey.
Yan. Dapat lang mga Pinoy yung gumagawa ng mga
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
site.
yeah.
I think that's a really great thing. Man, it's been a really great conversation we've been having with you. I wish we a lot more time over here. But as we start wrapping things up, uh, in your vast experience, both
Mhm.
as heading Endeavor and also when you were doing some venture capital work earlier on, can you share
Yeah.
with us maybe three or four key management insights that you've gained over the years and which we can share with the different entrepreneurs here right now who are listening to the program? What can they do to sort of like short circuit or expedite their process towards building their and scaling their businesses?
Well, the first one I'll just regurgitate, right? Which has to do with being a multiplier, right? So at Endeavor, we say we need to encourage people to redefine what success means. That success isn't simply the size of your bank account or your market cap or your valuation. Success, in fact, is really the kind of impact, the positive impact you have in an ecosystem, right? So think beyond yourself when you think about what you want to achieve, diba? And maybe my last one, right? The second one, I'll just give you two na lang.
Okay, sure.
My second one actually is, just to borrow a phrase from Simon Sinek, right? When you're building your business, start with why, right? And and really what that means is to be a purpose-driven entrepreneur, right? To be chasing something you care very deeply about. Because what I've noticed, that what I've observed, is it's the purpose-driven entrepreneurs, these people with a passion for solving something, that have the most endurance, that have the most grit, right? It's like a dog with a bone, right? They won't let go of it.
Mhm.
By contrast, I notice a lot of the people that are in it first for the money, when things go sour, when seas get rough, very often they'll give up na eh, and they'll move on to the next thing to make money, right? So I would say those two things, right? Is one, be a multiplier, right? Pay it forward. Because I am sure that in your life, somebody has paid it forward to you, right? That you have stood on the shoulders of someone, right? And so all we're trying to encourage entrepreneurs is, well, after that, you should become the shoulders of somebody else, right? And then, again, the last one is be a purpose driven entrepreneur, right? Focus on that big thing that's greater than yourself that you're trying to achieve in the world.
Thank you so much for sharing, Manny. I'm very inspired as well. I'm hoping one day maybe even the companies which I run and manage hopefully become part of Endeavor because they are purpose driven, and hopefully
Yeah.
the income which they generate are just part and parcel of being purpose driven and helping the economy grow here at the same time. For those who want to join again Endeavor, interested to find out more about Endeavor, again you can visit their website. That's endeavor.org.ph. And if you want to, Julio, let's put it there on screen right now. That's endeavor.org.ph. And also, if you want to check out their impact report and learn more about the big bubbles or the companies that are changing the face of entrepreneurship here in the Philippines and having that multiplier effect to grow more entrepreneurs in the country, you can check out the report. That's the endeavor.org.ph/2022 impact report. Again, thank you so much for your time, Manny. I hope to see you very soon in church again, where we always get to catch each other. Thank you so much, Manny.
RJ, it was my pleasure. Loved it. And more power to you and the show.
Again, thanks again, Manny. This has been the RJ Ledesa podcast. We will see you guys in the next podcast. Thanks so much, guys. See you. Have a great
Thank you.
night.
Thank you. Good night.